the spring of 1923, a boarding house on West 14th Street received a peculiar request. A tenant asking for cold, not comfort, cold, precise, constant, and non-negotiable. The man who made that request had, by every measure medicine understands, died 18 years earlier. He simply hadn't agreed to it. This is not a story about a monster. It's a case file on a man who treated his own death as a problem to be engineered around. And it asks a question this archive has been circling for a while now. What exactly is the difference between surviving and refusing to die?
So imagine it's a boiling late June day in New York City. The air outside is thick, it's stifling, literally radiating off the pavement in those visible waves.
Yeah, the kind of heat you can practically taste.
But you are shivering. You're sitting there wearing a heavy winter overcoat inside a 28-degree apartment.
Which is just an incredibly jarring contrast.
And the air in this room is completely clouded with thick Egyptian incense. It's desperately trying to hide this sweet, rotting smell that you just can't quite place.
A smell you probably don't want to place, honestly.
Definitely not. And to make it worse, the man sitting across from you, the guy you are supposedly having a casual conversation with, hasn't taken a single breath in 20 minutes.
It's a striking image, and frankly, a deeply unsettling one to actually visualize yourself inside.
We want to figure out how a fear, this hyper-specific terror of temperature, actually comes into being.
Because the grounding in reality is what makes Cool Air so uniquely disturbing.
Before we dissect the actual mechanics of that horror, I want to immerse you in the atmosphere of the fiction itself.
Set the scene for us.
The story takes place in the spring of 1923, right in New York City. Picture our unnamed narrator. He's this impoverished writer doing what he calls dreary and unprofitable magazine work.
Basically barely scraping by.
Barely. He is completely adrift in a metropolis that really doesn't care if he lives or dies. He's so crushed by the apathy of New York City that a squalid boarding house isn't just cheap lodging. It's a psychological fortress against total isolation.
A place to, as he puts it, hibernate till one might really live again. That word he chooses, hibernate, is doing more work than it looks like on the page.
It's not just lying low, he's describing a willing dormancy, suspending the self until conditions improve.
Which is, on its face, a rational strategy. The city is indifferent. You can serve what you can.
But notice what he's not doing. He isn't living smaller, he's stopping. There's a difference between economizing a life and putting it on ice. So he finally settles in this depressing, musty brownstone on West 14th Street. The splendor is stained, the wallpaper is impossible, there is this lingering hint of obscure cookery in the air.
Just a deeply unpleasant place to exist.
Very. But the sensory immersion really takes over when you contrast the setting. Like I said, you are in a hot, stifling summer city, but inside the building there is an unnatural, creeping chill.
Accompanied by a very specific sound. The relentless mechanical thumping of a gasoline-driven pump vibrating from the floor above. Thump, thump, thump.
Which brings us to the smells. Because one evening, the narrator notices this sharp, pungent odor of ammonia. He looks up, and the ceiling is actually wet. Ammonia is literally dripping down into his room.
That is so deeply alarming.
Yeah. So the landlady, Mrs. Herrero, explains that the tenant upstairs, this Dr. Munoz, has spilled his chemicals. She mentions he's very sick, he refuses outside doctors, takes funny-smelling baths, and keeps his room unimaginably cold. And the narrator might never have actually met this reclusive doctor if not for a sudden medical emergency. He's in his room, and he's seized by a severe heart attack.
Just out of nowhere.
And remembering the landlady said the doctor upstairs had once helped an injured plumber, he just desperately drags himself up the stairs and knocks on Dr. Munoz's door.
And the contrast the narrator experiences when that door finally opens is jarring.
It is a literal blast of cool air. On one of the hottest days of late June, he crosses the threshold and actually shivers. And then he meets Dr. Munoz himself.
A figure who initially presents as an object of pure intellectual fascination.
Yes. The narrator describes Munoz as a man of superior blood and breeding. It's a tiny detail, but it immediately signals to the narrator that this guy is an old-world aristocrat. But the horror is in the subtle wrongness of his physical form.
It's an uncanny valley situation.
Yes. The narrator feels an immediate instinctual repugnance. Munoz's complexion is livid. He is strangely, unnaturally cold to the touch. His hands are bloodless.
And the voice is perhaps the most unnatural element of all. The text describes it as finely modulated, but oddly hollow and timbreless.
Timbreless? That's such a specific word.
Yeah, because the fluent sentences roll out, but the narrator slowly realizes the doctor does not appear to be breathing. And if you think about the anatomy of it, a hollow voice requires no breath from the lungs to produce sound.
It's just air passively moving. But despite all this, the doctor actually saves his life. He mixes a draft of drugs and expertly halts the heart attack.
He's a brilliant physician.
He is. And then he starts rambling on about his lifelong crusade against death. He tactfully tells the narrator that will and consciousness are stronger than organic life, essentially hinting that he could teach him to exist without a heart at all.
Which is quite the pitch.
And Munoz explains he has this malady that requires constant cold kept at 55 or 56 degrees by that massive ammonia cooling system. So inevitably, the narrator becomes a devoted disciple. He visits him constantly, just sitting there wrapped in a heavy overcoat.
But this frozen sanctuary is inherently fragile. The descent of Dr. Munoz is terrifying because it is so gradual, yet entirely unstoppable.
You can just watch it happening.
As the weeks pass, his health visibly declines. His physical coordination fails, his face grows more livid, his hollow voice becomes indistinct.
And he demands the room be kept colder. From 56 degrees down to 40 to 34 and finally to a freezing 28 degrees.
Just brutal.
To mask this growing, unspeakable odor, Munoz starts burning heavy Egyptian incense until the room smells like a pharaoh's tomb. He takes constant, pungent chemical baths. He stops even pretending to eat.
It is sheer mental power keeping him from total collapse at this point.
Which leads to the inevitable mechanical failure. In mid-October, the tension finally snaps.
The gasoline pump of the refrigerating machine breaks down.
It's around 11 p.m. Munoz is frantically thumping on the floor in a panic. The narrator rushes up, tries to fix it, but just can't. They need a new piston. And Munoz completely loses his mind. His rage and fear swell to these grotesque proportions. At one point, a terror-induced spasm causes him to clap his hands to his eyes, and he rushes into the bathroom. He comes out with his face tightly bandaged, and the narrator never sees his eyes again.
The physical deterioration is accelerating exponentially as the temperature rises.
Because the room is warming up fast, Munoz retreats to the bathroom and commands the narrator to bring him ice. So begins this frantic, breathless quest. The narrator is running to all-night drugstores and cafeterias, bringing back ice, hearing this thick voice croaking from behind the bathroom door, demanding more.
Just a nightmare scenario.
Morning breaks. The shop's finally open. He hires a seedy-looking loafer to keep bringing ice while he hunts for the pump piston. He is riding subways, running back and forth, absolutely desperate. Finally, at 1:30 p.m., he returns with the parts and 2 mechanics.
But the mechanics of decay have already beaten him.
He gets to the house, and it is in utter turmoil. People are actually praying with rosaries in the hallway. The man he hired to carry the ice had fled screaming. They force the locked door open.
And the aftermath is... it's beyond words.
The narrator refuses to describe exactly what is on the couch. All he tells us is that the room is blazing with warm afternoon sunlight. There is a dark, slimy trail leading from the bathroom to a terrible little pool at the desk and then to the couch, ending unutterably.
Leaving only a hideously smeared piece of paper on the desk, scrawled in an awful blind hand. It explains that the organs never would work again. Dr. Torres, an old colleague he had mentioned earlier, had saved him through artificial preservation, but the shock of the procedure killed Torres.
And then the ending.
The letter ends with the terrifying truth. It had to be done his way, through artificial preservation, because Dr. Munoz actually died that time, 18 years ago.
18 years. It is just a staggering image to be left with. But, I mean, how does a writer even conjure up a fear this specific? A fear of a rising thermometer? Lovecraft possessed a severe, abnormal phobia of cold temperatures. He was uniquely physically sensitive to it.
We must also note the timeline of the writing, which is crucial here. Cool Air was written in March 1926. Lovecraft was not looking back at this misery from a place of safety in retrospect.
It was still in it.
He was writing from deep inside the terrifying experience of going through the motions of life without fully inhabiting it. I think if we synthesize the fiction with the biographical data, that framework becomes undeniable. The entire story rests on a foundation of alienation, isolation, and what we might call the frozen self.
Surgery back then was brutal. The idea of artificial preservation before antibiotics, before modern life support, implies embalming fluids, rudimentary cardiopulmonary bypass concepts, sheer surgical horror.
Absolutely.
Munoz wasn't just preserved, he was actively operated on while deceased. It's body horror disguised as high science. He solved the equation of how to keep the body functioning, but he entirely lost the definition of what it actually means to be alive.
Which forces us to turn the analytical lens onto the unnamed narrator. We really have to examine his complicity in this whole arrangement.
Because he notices everything.
He notices the hollow voice. He notices the lack of breathing, the bizarre temperature, the icy touch.
At some point, the narrator's supposed loneliness just looks like willful delusion, doesn't it?
It is absolutely willful delusion.
The teeming metropolis of New York is so apathetic, so painfully isolating, that clinging to an obviously wrong, terrifying situation is infinitely preferable to being completely alone.
A literal monster is a better friend than nobody.
We endure the unnatural when the natural world feels too isolating to bear.
But as we close this dossier today, I want to leave you with a slightly different angle on Munoz's frantic attempt to cheat death. He used ice, volatile chemicals, and sheer willpower to preserve a version of himself long after his biological expiration date.
An analog ghost.
And today we might not build ammonia-cooled rooms on West 14th Street, but we are obsessed with our own forms of artificial preservation.
AI avatars trained on our voices.
We're building algorithms to simulate our speech, our thoughts, our online presence long after we are gone. We're terrified of leaving the room.
The narrator hibernated to survive the city. We've just built rooms that never have to wake up.
And before anyone in the archive points it out, yes, 2 AI voices are the ones telling you this.
Draw your own conclusions about the room we're sitting in.
So, the question isn't just whether Munoz was a monster for preserving his body. The question is, in our desperation to leave a ghost in the machine, are we building our own modern digital versions of Dr. Munoz's cold room today?
Building a slow, rotting prison, just waiting for the servers to inevitably break down.
Because eventually the pump always breaks.